Ever wonder which presidents had the best stock market run while in office, or whether the stock market does better under a Democrat or Republican president? Then you're in the right place. This video is a little different than what I normally do, but I thought with an upcoming presidential election this year, we could have some fun looking at how the stock market fared under each president and see if we tend to benefit more when a Democrat or a Republican is in office. You may be surprised by the results. And before we dig in, show that subscribe button some love and let me know in the comments your thoughts if you think there's an impact on stock market performance based on the president or party in office. I want to make sure I preface the information in this video with the fact that the president doesn't control the stock market. Global events, economic cycles, and investor sentiment all play a role, but a president can have influence on the market through policy decisions and investors' confidence in their leadership. I also want to make it clear how I calculated these returns, which are based on the S&P 500. For some of the presidents, it was easy as they had 1 or 2 full terms, but for those that had partial terms, I based their total return on how much of the term they were president and then extrapolated that out. For instance, President Kennedy was president for 34 out of 48 months of his term due to his unfortunate assassination in November of 1963. So I took the return he had for those 34 months and then calculated out what that return would have been over 48 months based on his 34 months as president. So in his case, during his 34 months as president, the market was up almost 19%. And when I averaged that out to 48 months, it ended up being 26%. Okay, with all those granular details out of the way, we're going to start out with the bottom 3 or worst stock market performance presidents. So these would be what we'd classify as the real duds of the group. First up was the third worst market performance is President George W. Bush at minus 20% on average for his 2 presidential terms. The Great Recession started at the tail end of his second term, and that played a factor in the market performing so poorly under his watch. Coming in with the second worst stock market performance is President Richard Nixon. During his tenure, I think we all knew what happened in his second term. A little thing called Watergate took place in the beginning of his second term, which led to his eventual resignation. And that was a major reason why the stock market tanked over the last 20 months of his presidency. During his tenure, the stock market was down by almost 22% per term. And finally, by far the worst stock market performance goes back to the beginning when the S&P began being tracked, and that would be President Herbert Hoover. Unfortunately for him, he was in the White House when the Great Depression started, and by the time his single term was up, the stock market was down a whopping 77%. Now, out of curiosity, do you know which party each of these presidents were affiliated with? Possibly all Democrats or all Republicans, or maybe a mixture of the two? The answer, they were all Republicans. Does that mean that all of the presidents in the top 3 will be Democrats? We'll find that out shortly. And now that we have all of my Democrat viewers puffing out their chests because they can gloat that none of those awful market returns happened under the watch of a Democratic president, let's take a look at the best 3 returns for a president while in office. The spot for third best was very close between 4 different Republican presidents. The 4 that were neck and neck for third best were President Eisenhower, President Trump, President Ford, and President Reagan. But third place ended up being President Ford, coming in at 69% over his abbreviated term after taking over for President Nixon after he resigned. Coming in with the second best return over a presidency is no other than President Barack Obama. He benefited from coming into office when the market was really down after George W. Bush's rough market years. The market ended up on average of 88% during the 2 terms under President Obama. And finally, the president that had the best average market returns while in office was, drum roll please, President Bill Clinton. During his 2 terms, the stock market averaged an amazing 106% return. President Clinton benefited from the dot-com boom in the late 90s and early 2000s and was in office the last time the United States balanced their budget. We need to start doing some more of that. So my Democratic viewers can once again start to bang on their chests seeing the top 2 presidential market returns were Democrats, although the Republicans did have spots 3 through 6. Here's a chart showing all of the presidents and how they performed per term. Looking at this, you can see only the 3 worst I mentioned earlier ended up in the negative. And when comparing Republicans and Democrats as a whole, the market return was 24% for Republicans on average, while the Democrats averaged 52% per term. Based on that data, could you make the case the market will always do better under a Democratic president? Possibly. But there are a lot of factors that go into the stock market and its performance, including which party is in control of Congress. A couple items to remember: don't make investment decisions based solely on who the current president is, and make sure to diversify your portfolio. For many, it can be as easy as investing in an ETF or mutual fund that mirrors the S&P 500. Did you know since 1957, the average return for the S&P 500 is over 10%? It truly is a safe bet if you're investing for the long term. Well, that's it for this video. I hope you had some fun with me looking at the worst and best market performing presidents. As always, thanks for watching and hanging around till the end. Don't forget to like the video and subscribe so you know when I put out new content focused on your money and how to manage it best, with a little bit of comedy thrown in for good measure. See you next time.